welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Maureen Moore. I'm the Associate Director of the Allowed series of the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, and we're so pleased to have you with us. Do we have any first-time visitors to Allowed? Lots. Well, welcome. Awesome to see you here, and hello to everybody watching the live stream. We hope to hear from you during the Q&A later tonight. Well, if you didn't notice, you might have seen our fabulous postcard of Allowed calendar events out in the lobby, which functions as a special memento from tonight, but also shares about what we do here this summer and year-round. We're just about to conclude our summer season with tonight and followed by one final program next week, which is a commemoration of Nelson Mandela on the 100th anniversary of his birth and on the occasion of the publishing of his prison letters. So both tonight and next week are very special evenings for us, and we hope that you're joining us, if not live, also on the live stream. And Allowed has a wonderful archive of programs from the past. We've been around for 25 years supporting the work of the Los Angeles Public Library, and programming is brought to you for free now, but it's actually supported and funded by people like you who believe in our mission of supporting the library, whose mission is free access to ideas and information. And that could not be more important than it is now in this moment. So thank you for being here, and we'd love to tell you more about what's coming up. This fall, we'll be back in September with some really exciting programs. Karl Ove Knausgaard is joining us from Sweden, Tommy Orange coming down from Oakland, Susan Orlean, and so many more. So we'll tell you all about that. If you join as a member, you'll get first dibs, but of course, you're welcome. Just sign up for our email so you hear more about our news in the future. The important thing is to be alert, to question, to find out, so that your own initiative may be awakened. I take that quote from Bruce Lee, the famous martial artist, movie star, and cultural icon who at his core was a philosopher. And perhaps more important than all of those descriptors, he was a human being. His art sprung from his philosophy, one which embraced simplicity, directness, and personal freedom. Though his life was much too short, Bruce Lee's legacy has impacted generations of followers around the world and continues to do so today with the work that his daughter, Shannon Lee, through the Bruce Lee Foundation, cultivates. Tonight, we've brought together a very special group of writers and thinkers to explore his legacy through a distinct lens on the occasion of the 45th anniversary of his death later this week. We are deeply honored to welcome Shannon Lee and W. Kamau Bell to the Allowed stage for the very first time, and so pleased as well to welcome back our friends Jeff Chang and Sharon Ann Lee. Our distinguished guests will offer their perspectives and personal histories as a way of exploring Bruce Lee's legacy and how he became an unexpected icon for Afro-Asian unity. And I'd like to offer also a special thanks to our moderator, Sharon Ann Lee, with whom I've been in conversation for many years about putting this program together. Her passion and enthusiasm have been so contagious, so I'm so thrilled everything has come together as it has. We'll start off our evening with a short video clip by movement artist John Buggs, and following that, our guests will be in conversation with each other up until about 8:45 or so tonight, before an audience Q&A with all of you. If you do have a question, please wait for a mic. We will come to you and focus on a question. And then following the program in the auditorium, you can join Kamau and Jeff for a book signing in the lobby. And their books are on sale, compliments of our library store, also in the lobby. So now I'll leave you with a few words from John Buggs that he wished to share with you about his piece that you're just about to see, titled, "Be Like Water." Bruce Lee's philosophy transcends martial arts. The way he approached his craft is the same way I strive to approach movement art. No styles, just honestly expressing myself as truthfully as I can. Be Like Water, this piece, was dedicated to the legacy of Bruce and what he stood for as a human being and not just a martial artist. So thank you and enjoy tonight.
Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. Oneself honestly, not lying to oneself, and to express myself honestly. Now that, my friend, is very hard to do. People are different. Be formless, shapeless, human beings, one family. Be water, my friend. Express oneself honestly, not lying to oneself, and to express myself honestly. Now that, my friend, is very hard to do. You know what I want to think of myself? Honestly expressing as a human being. Empty your mind. One family. Be formless, shapeless. You know what I want to think of myself? As a human being. Under the heaven, man, there is but one family. It just so happened, man, that people are different. I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Empty your mind. Be water. One family. Be water. To express oneself honestly, not lying to oneself, and to express myself honestly.
Is this us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you good? Uh-oh. Yeah, somebody, we need some mic assistance here.
I got it. No, I don't got it. I'm not used to using microphones to talk. That was a joke that 3 people got. Hello, hello. All right.
Are you plugged in?
Hello.
Let me just do this real quick. There we go.
Thanks, Shannon.
Anything I can do.
Well, that was great on Facebook Live, I'm sure.
We planned that comedic entry with a comedian on stage. Thank you guys for coming to this evening, and I just wanted to start the conversation by introducing myself. My name is Sharon Ann Lee, and I have almost the same name as Shannon Lee, so you will confuse us. You'll have a quiz later. I'm a cultural anthropologist. I am personally a Bruce Lee superfan. And Shannon and I co-host the Bruce Lee podcast, where we break down Bruce Lee's philosophy. And we started that 2 years ago because on this very anniversary of his passing, Shannon wanted to really mark the anniversary as a moment of celebration instead of sadness. And so today we come to celebrate his legacy, his energy, his philosophy, and how alive it still is. And I wanted to also just talk about this really interesting conversation. I mean, we're kind of immersed in Bruce Lee world all the time, so we are super familiar with this connection between African American culture and Bruce Lee. And it's a kind of a love affair, and those of us who are in these worlds totally know it, but it hasn't been a kind of public conversation, so we wanted to kind of, bring it to you guys. So I wanted to start with, a kind of, we'll all kind of introduce ourselves and start talking. But I wanted to start with Jeff Chang, who's a critic and a historian, and to just give you guys the kind of establishing shot landscape of what was going on in the late 60s and 70s, and what was going on to like percolate this kind of union between Bruce and African Americans, and we'll kind of take it from there. So Jeff, take it away.
Thank you. And thanks to the LA Public Library for hosting us here today. Thanks to Shannon, thanks to Sharon, thanks Kamau. Yeah, just for being awesome, I guess.
Anytime.
Yes. So my name is Jeff Chang. I'm a writer. The next book that I'm working on is a biography of Bruce Lee.
Yes.
With
Yay!
the help of Shannon and Kamau and Sharon and a whole bunch of other folks. But I guess I just wanted to maybe start off by talking about Bruce emerging in the late 60s during this time of increasing third world consciousness. So he's coming onto the scene, and he's also, in his movies, advancing this sort of radical cultural politics of an underdog, right? That's anti-colonial, that's anti-racist, and that's right in line with a lot of the social movements that are happening at that particular period, especially in the US, especially here on the West Coast, right? And so there's a real reason, there's a real monetary reason and racial reason that black audiences were the first audiences to be exposed to Bruce Lee out of Hong Kong, and that was because of old-fashioned segregation. You have white flight from the cities, and so you have, movie theaters out in the suburbs that are programming in a certain kind of way. And then you have theaters that are in the cities, in the inner cities, that are programmed a certain kind of way. And, Hong Kong movies came inexpensively. And so they're literally coming in and playing in the same theaters that you would see movies like Sweet Sweetback or Shaft or blaxploitation movies during that particular period. And the thing is audiences, just because it's playing in black theaters, right, and for black audiences, it didn't necessarily mean that Bruce had to be successful,
Right.
that the movies would have been successful in that way. That's because of Bruce,
Right.
right? And so you get Bruce in his movies reflecting all of these different types of themes that African Americans leading the black freedom struggle and inspiring all of these other movements in the Asian American community, in particular on the West Coast and in New York City. You get all of these resonances that kind of come out of this really amazing moment that starts off again as something that segregation creates. And then it crosses over by 1972, 1973, so that when you get to Enter the Dragon, You've already got kung fu movies. Kung fu movies are literally the top movies during the entire spring-summer blockbuster season in 1973.
And then that phenomenon then trickled down into television, right?
That's
so these
right.
kind of blocks of time, a lot of people saw, you know, a similar block of cheap time, maybe Sunday afternoon where there was dead air time, or late Saturday afternoon, and it was just had filler, right?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Hawaii, so it's a little bit different. We had, you know, Asian language channels and that kind of thing. But yeah, you'd have the samurai movies, and you'd have the kung fu movies during these blocks, and you know, lots of us latchkey kids are just growing up there, you know, watching these movies for hours upon hours and stuff.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of the background. And so as this content is trickling from these segregated theaters and then into our homes in that kind of same way, like here's some cheap content that can fill time. There is young Kamau who's on the receiving end. So tell us you know, we want to humanize this whole phenomenon with Kamau's story.
I can be a human.
Okay.
That's why I tripped earlier, to show I'm a human. So, yes, to first of all, Jeff Chang is the best. My life has changed several times because of Jeff Chang, and then so I just want to give him enough like love and you know. I grow up, although I'm older than you. So and Shannon.
Yes.
There's many things on the record of me saying. So just look at those things and thank you. I just feel very grateful to be here because, as I've said to Sharon and Shannon before, like 13-year-old me is freaking out right now. And 45-year-old me is handling it okay. But like to be sort of caught up in the conversation of like I was the kid, as you said, who, you know, I moved around a lot as a kid, but every town at this point in the mid-'80s had either Black Belt Sunday or Samurai Sunday, even though they were never showing samurai movies where I was. Sort of these karate, these sort of like blocks of time on Saturday and Sunday afternoons where they would show one or two kung fu movies, many of which claimed to star Bruce Lee. Yes. Or at least seemed like they starred Bruce Lee because the guy was being called Bruce by everybody in the movie. And so I was a kid in like watching TV going, man, Bruce Lee made like 100 movies, and he looks different in some of them. Sometimes he's skinnier, sometimes he's bigger, you know. But he made a lot of movies. And then the video store revolution basically takes over, and it starts to be. I get to an age where I can go to video stores by myself, and I see 4 very distinct movies with his face on them. We're like, wait, are these Bruce Lee movies I haven't seen? Because his movies were not coming on TV at that point. They were like caught up in all sorts of rights issues and things. So I think I was part of a generation of kids who thought they were watching Bruce Lee movies and were not watching Bruce Lee movies.
Lots of counterfeit Bruce Lee content.
And to be honest, some of them were better than some of them were okay. You know, I'm not mad at all of them. Some of them I am. Tiger Lee was not good. Bruce Lee, well, I think he should get some credit at some point, but not tonight. But then to go to the video store, Video Connection in the south side of Chicago in Hyde Park, and see these 4 movies that all look very similar with his face in them, that you take them home and go, oh, I will, I've never seen this one. I think Enter the Dragon was the first one I got, and to watch that and go, this is different. This is qualitatively different than those other movies by leaps and bounds. So I want to be clear. It's not like an accident that Bruce Lee rose, like it wasn't just we were just getting Bruce Lee movies in black neighborhoods or black people. We were getting lots of kung fu movies, some of which we still like, that, you know, the Wu-Tang Clan based the whole philosophy around the world. Yeah. So it's not, but right. Bruce Lee was the one, we were like, oh, this is the version of it that we like the best. This is clearly the best version of this. So for me, then it becomes like this, and this is pre-internet, pre-everything else, then I become this Bruce Lee evangelist before the internet, and I constantly run into people who are like I remember, I told you this before, the nerdy thing I did. Bruce Lee didn't have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and so I read that you could like get petitions to get people, so I was in high school walking around with a clipboard.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Arguing with people about why he deserved a star. And some guy was like, he made so many movies and none of them are that good. Those weren't his movies! And really, never, ever, it was years later, it wasn't until I was an adult in San Francisco and I went to a screening of that documentary we talked about, the Warrior
Within.
Not that one.
Warrior's Journey.
Warrior's Journey.
Yeah.
But I went to see this documentary about Bruce Lee in Chinatown in San Francisco after I'd moved to San Francisco. And I went to this Chinatown in San Francisco where Bruce Lee was born. And I'm sitting there watching it, and it was only when I looked around at all the Chinese Americans around me that I realized, oh, wait, he's not mine. Like I'm leasing him, but I don't own him the way. And plus, in San Francisco, there were people in the room who knew him because he had lived there. And it was that. I was like, oh, this is, in some sense. And I came to. And I think Bruce Lee invited us to do this, but I need to be aware of my cultural appropriation of this man, and be respectful about how that basically. Jeff Chang outranks me.
No category do I outrank
in the same way that, like, I feel like with Malcolm X, maybe I outrank you. I don't know. Or Muhammad Ali or whatever, you know. But for me, it was like this really, like, sort of putting him in his proper cultural perspective as a Chinese American and Asian American and Asian Chinese hero that is way different than what he felt to me as a black kid growing up. Even though I do feel, as we say, those movies, there's a clear pushback against the man, pushback against state power, pushback against racism. In Chinese Connection, the second one, the names are so.
Fist and Fury.
Yeah.
Chinese
There's where he can't go into a place because no Chinese or dogs allowed, and every black kid watching that is like, we understand that. We have fought against that kind of state power, and so for me, like it just felt like, because I felt like I was the only Bruce Lee fan in the world. He was mine, and then it was later as an adult I realized, oh, I'm placing him in his proper context. Yeah.
Well, but let me go back to that kid moment and all the times that you spent as like kind of #1 Bruce Lee fan by yourself, your own club that you made.
I had friends.
I know.
Really pushing this narrative.
No. Kamau started recruiting people into this club. But no, I want to go back to the moment where you really just, as you said, like he felt like he was mine. You did not see the racial color line between you. And I think that's really interesting. Like, just kind of talk to that where you said, like, it just like, oh, he was mine, he was me, and he was like in my life. And there was just like at no point did you even recognize, there was no speed bump there.
No, there was no speed. I mean, I think you know, a lot of kids, especially, we focus this on black kids at this point, since that's what we're here for. I want to be clear, but this is clear with a lot of kids. There's a sense of vulnerability, a sense of not being protected in the world, a sense of having to do for yourself. And this is the things that black parents teach their kids every day. You have to take care of yourself. You have to be on watch. You have to be aware. You have to be able to be out in the world and be able to, like, be careful. And if something happens, and there's also a sense of, like, wanting to defend yourself. And that goes pre-Bruce Lee. I mean, martial arts in the black community, we can talk about the Nation of Islam with Malcolm X in the 60s. We can talk about the Black Panthers did martial arts. There's sort of a history of martial arts in that community. But then it all sort of there's embodied in Bruce Lee. And so all those messages of self-determination and self-reliance and self-protection it's just preaching right to a thing that we're also hearing in the church and hearing in barbershops and hearing in hair salons and hearing on the street about how we have to do for ourselves. And Bruce Lee, forget him on screen is saying that, and then all the writings that he's doing are saying the exact same thing. So it's a very, like, it's just like that message is so strong. And also then when you learn about him in Oakland being one of the first Asian American people to train people in martial arts outside, and one of his friends is a black guy, Jesse. Like, it's just like he was not separate from us. It was all the same stuff we were hearing in our living rooms.
Well, and this sense of unity, you know, this kind of energy of unity that this energy, he's been dead for 45 years now. It's still very much alive. And Shannon, I want you to speak to that a little bit and just kind of how, you know, why keeping this legacy going, educating people on your dad's philosophy is still so meaningful for you.
I mean, you know, you know, I've been Bruce Lee's daughter my whole life. But with that, there's sort of a growing understanding of his place in the world and you know, my relationship to it and my relationship to his philosophy and who he was as a human being. and I've just been so amazed over all these years and all of the people I've encountered and all of the places I've gone, how absolutely beloved he is, and how inspirational and motivational and important his philosophy is on a human level for everyone. And so, you know, I've come across, so it's very important for me because that energy is still alive in his writings. You can feel it when you watch his films. It comes out at you. And in particular, you know, the characters he played and the themes and all of that, but it all came through this like vortex of personal work that he did on himself, and then he's expressing it out through the medium of film and television. And it's this energy, it still exists, it's still relevant, it can still excite and intrigue you as a human being. And then if you get to the place where you then are interested and you start to look at his words and understand who he was and his writings and his philosophies, you start to see like, oh wow, there's some really interesting and good and useful things for me as a human being here in these words. And then to see the way he has touched so many people's lives. I mean, and not just the amazing lives that are sitting right here next to me. I love you guys. I feel like I have to, you guys are so loving, I have to say that. I love everybody on this stage. Thank you for being here. And then to see things like, you know, there is a statue of my father in Mostar, Bosnia. And it was put there after the conflict because during the conflict, many of the monuments were destroyed. And when that was done and they were trying to decide, well, what monuments do we put back? And that was such a, you know, an ethnic struggle. And they were fighting over, well, what monuments do we put back? And the one thing that they could all agree upon was their love for Bruce Lee.
Yeah, now these are people who were literally slaughtering each other, you know? And they definitely had a lot of conflicts going on, but they could all agree that they loved Bruce Lee, and this became a monument of unity, of the togetherness that and kind of going forward. And so
yeah, and they saw him as a symbol of ethnic harmony. And so there is a statue of Bruce Lee in Mostar.
And there are so many of these stories, and you know, we and Shannon didn't have anything to do with that. It was just
Nothing.
the communities getting together, deciding on their own, based on, you know, reverberating on the same energy that captivated Kamau, you know, as a young boy. So, you know, while he's having his Bruce Lee awakening, you know, through these movies, you know, Shannon's born into, you know, the royal family, right? So she's kind of swimming in this water. And, you know, it's your dad. And so as a kid growing up, you're not going to be as impressed as other people. So, you know, like, because it's your dad.
Whatever.
You know, right. She had the teenage, like, whatever, that's my dad moment. But I want to wind back a little bit to just kind of your personal awakening to your dad's philosophy as an adult, you know, because it hit you in the same way, this kind of emotional core, this speaking to my heart, I see you, you see me, this kind of heart connection. Surprisingly enough, you know, many years after his death and you not having him around physically, you have that kind of connection with your own father through his philosophy. So speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and it's not just through his philosophy, it's through him and his energy. So he died when I was 4, and my memories are very, you know, brief and more like glimpses and images. But the strongest and most profound memory that I have of him is what he felt like, you know. And if you think about, you know, those years from 0 to 4, like for a good portion of that, you're pre-verbal. And what you are getting is you're just soaking in, you know, the environment, and you're feeling everything. And so for the longest time, I would say to myself, like, why do I feel like I know him so personally and so intimately? And it's because he was so present and so real and so engaged on such an immediate level with me, obviously, but also with so many other people. I mean, you see all of the people who knew him and who were good friends and students of his, they are touched in their hearts by him. To this day, some of his friends who are still alive are moved to tears when they talk about him. And but it was, for me, you know, of course, I always held a deep, deep love for him in my heart as my father, and sort of amazed by, you know, what he could do. I mean, I was on set of a lot of the movies, let alone that I've seen them 1,000 times. But it was in discovering his writings and words as a young adult, when I was going through some of my own difficulties and tough times, and in particular after the death of my brother, that his words really started to resonate on a profound level for me as a human being. And I think that, you know, part of what you were talking about, and, you know, how this drive toward self-sufficiency, and how he was this citizen of the world. He himself encountered a lot of racism because he was not 100% Chinese. And when that was found out, when he was a kid, he was kicked out of his martial arts school, actually, for that. And he grew up in Hong Kong, which was, you know, a colony of Great Britain, but populated by mostly Chinese people. And he just had this sense of, I've got to do for myself. I've got to, and I want to approach the world in this human way. Like, you know, I mean, you saw in the video a little bit, they used some sampling of some of his words where and there's a famous quote where, when they're asking him, you know, oh, do you identify as Chinese or do you identify as North American? And he said, you know how I want to think of myself? As a human being. And the truth of the fact is, that is how he approached the world and all of the people in the world, is as human beings. I mean, his first student was an African-American guy, Jesse Glover. His best friend was a Japanese man. I mean, you know, and there's lots of, like, Chinese-Japanese tension.
Well, especially coming out of Hong Kong, where the Japanese occupation was such a big deal.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's all of this foundation and all of this love, and it's really love. And when people, when I talk to people about Bruce Lee and about how Bruce Lee is all about love, they're kind of like, no, Bruce Lee is all about kicking ass. I'm like, yes, kicking ass through love.
Can I maybe add to that? I've been thinking about this a lot, too, because, you know, like, yeah, martial arts is about kicking ass. It's about protecting yourself. It's about finishing somebody before they finish you. And that's so much of what his training was about. But in so many ways, like, he used martial arts as a healing type of tool, right? Because Jesse Glover, his first student, African-American, here's a guy who was a frail kid. He was sickly. And he grows up African-American in Seattle with all of the, you know, all of the stuff that would imply during that particular period in Seattle, which is still not as diverse as we are here. And he is searching for a way to be able to build some confidence. And so he tries to go out and learn judo from folks. He learns a little bit from a Chinese kid. The kid moves away. He goes and asks the Japanese kids, can I study jiu-jitsu, judo with you guys? They're like, no, you can't study with us. You're not Japanese. And he goes through, like, the story of him trying to learn martial arts for the first, 20 years of his life is a story of him not being able to learn martial arts because nobody will teach him. And so he gets to a point where, and the other part of his life is that at 12 years old, he and his 3 friends are walking home, and they see some cops, and the cops decide that they're going to chase him. And the cops come and beat the hell out of him and his friends, so that his tooth is sticking out of his lip. And that becomes this catalytic moment, like, I have to do this for myself. And so when Bruce comes to town and does he does sort of a demonstration and that kind of thing, Jesse starts stalking him, literally. And finally Bruce is like, what's going on here? And Jesse's like, I really want to learn from you. And Bruce says yes. And I think that the thing that's so interesting about this is that, there's 2 things happening here. Like, Jesse is finding a teacher that he's been looking for, but Bruce learns that he's a teacher as well, that he has something to give as a teacher. And he gives that to Taki Kimura, who comes back from being interned and has his confidence completely shattered in a similar type of way to the way that Jesse's was shattered by this moment with the police when they're brutalizing him and his friends. And I think that in Seattle, there's this way in which he begins to understand himself as just as more than a dude who can rock, who's nice with his fists and stuff, and then can basically, and his legs, and can make stuff happen and kick people's asses. I think that's where it shifts.
Yeah, totally. And
And also, at the same time, women were being taught by Bruce, early when, no one was teaching women. And so if you look at, we have a photo of his studio of all the students, and it was like the United Nations, all these different colors and women and men. And so I think partly it's because, as you said, he had his own experience of being discriminated against, and he was determined to, provide a different experience for his students.
Yeah, and that was the one thing my mom always said, is that he just treated people, took them at face value. He didn't look at, what ethnicity they were, or what, whether they had money or didn't have money or whatever. He was just like, if you are sincere about wanting to connect, and you're sincere about wanting to learn, then I'm sincere about it too.
I mean, it's sort of interesting to me because it connects to a thing, I feel like if Bruce had started teaching non-Chinese people and there had been Twitter, Asian, Chinese Twitter would be like, who's this sellout teaching our secrets? I think we have to really understand how big a deal it was that we, especially in LA, martial arts, donut shops, they all go together. I get it. But that was not happening in the late 60s, early 70s, where there was martial arts stores in every strip mall. And for Bruce to sort of have to do it, there's a sense he has to contend with his community, saying, this is ours, and you're giving it away.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that defines us, that separates us from this culture. And also, as we talk about in Chinatown, there was among a lot of Chinese people in Chinatown, we really don't want to integrate into this culture. We really do want this to, when they come here, we do want this to feel foreign and away from them, So there's a sense of, I'm here talking about Chinatown to a bunch of anyway. Explain Chinatown to all of you. Shut up, Kamau. Go back to black people.
Are you China-splaining? Is that what you're doing?
I'm Chinatown explaining.
Okay. All right.
All I'm trying to get to is the fact that him teaching other people outside of his race.
You can Asian-splain, and I'll black-splain back.
Okay. I think the reason why I bring it up, because I think of it like that there is a sense of amongst black people too, of in-house, out-house. Keep things you keep in-house that you don't share with others, things you can share with other people, and you don't necessarily want to be seen as giving your culture away.
Yeah, but you know, what's also interesting though too about this is, and I get where it came from, right? It comes from this thing of like, no, this is how we're going to protect ourselves, right? When the police are going to come into Chinatown, this is how we're going to protect ourselves. I mean, that's basically the martial art that I've been trained in is Kaji Kembo, which folks developed so they could protect themselves against sailors in Honolulu who would come around just trying to stomp fools on a Saturday night, you know? And so it's like, no, we're going to actually train each other, us, you know, little guys, train each other on how to defend ourselves, and the tide turns, right?
Yeah.
So you can understand where it comes from.
Oh, absolutely.
I think the thing about Bruce was that it's not like he was going out and training like the 1%. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And that makes all the difference in the world.
He wasn't trained.
He was training like these misfits who had been alienated from society and who were literally in need of, like, I'm sure he didn't know Jesse's story when he started training. I'm sure he didn't know Taki's story when he started training him, you know, but there was something that he could probably feel and that they certainly saw in him. And so training these underdogs to protect themselves and that kind of thing is a completely different, and women, to these men and women, like, is a completely different thing than training like 1%ers to go ham on the locals, you know, on their weekend off.
Yeah,
you know?
and the truth of the matter is he loved his culture. He loved being that he was a Chinese man and his Chinese culture, but rather than like protecting it and keeping it to himself, he wanted to share it, and he wanted to share it authentically, you know, and that was why actually later he got into movies, was because it was an opportunity for him to share his culture and an authentic representation of it and his art through a bigger medium, you know, than his schools.
I want to jump back to, so after you had your Bruce Lee awakening, you were, you know, really in hot pursuit of going and learning what he learned, and you were, you know, taking the bus across town. So just talk to us about your own crusade of like learning it and then like starting your club and just the momentum that had on your own life.
I had a club.
Your club, your video club.
I may have oversold some things. I mean, so I was in Chicago, and I was also in Alabama at the time. I think it's also, I don't want to go too far without remarking on another movie that helped sort of like fire up my love of Bruce Lee, that made me feel like I was right to love Bruce Lee, was The Last Dragon, starring Timok, which is a movie that sort of takes all that African-American Bruce Lee thing and smashes it into one beautiful B movie. Maybe better in your memory if you've seen it, and you haven't seen it, just look at the poster. No, it's a beautiful movie. It's a beautiful movie, but it's like, it's about a black kid who they call Bruce Leroy. I mean, that tells you all you need to know. It features a very young Keisha Knight Pulliam, in addition to lots of other things. So it's this movie that sort of like is like, oh, like I was mad at Timok. I'm supposed to be Bruce Leroy, but so then it becomes this thing about like I'm taking like karate at like a community center, and then I start taking taekwondo. But the whole time I'm like, this isn't what Bruce did. This isn't getting me closer to connecting with Bruce Lee. I moved to Chicago. I live in Hyde Park on the south side. There's a Wing Chun school on the north side of Chicago, which is like Chicago's it's like LA. So it's like it's not close. I have to take like buses and an L and walk to get there. But every day after school, I went to Phil Nearing's Wing Chun Kung Fu, a white dude with a pompadour, who was nice with his hands. He was really good at Wing Chun, because it was like, I need to learn Bruce's original style. There were not, at that point, Jeet Kune Do schools around the way there are, become more common. But I need to start at the source. I really felt like that too. Like, even if there had been a Jeet Kune Do school, I feel like I needed to start at the source. I wanted to, at that point, I envisioned myself like really walking that path. I thought I was going to be a martial arts instructor. I knew I wanted to be in showbiz. I thought maybe I'll be the next action star. But it's not that funny.
It could still happen.
Yeah. So
All 182 pounds of you, right?
Exactly. Nice. Easter egg for some of you. So it becomes this thing where I was like, I really need to go to the source and learn what he learned. And I remember at some point, like I said, every day after school, I would go 5 days a week. I took time out of my dating that wasn't happening. But and at some point, my Wing Chun instructor goes, you've learned all of the Wing Chun that Bruce Lee knows now. Like, because he left and went to America.
Yeah.
There's 3 levels of Wing Chun. He was apparently in the middle of the 2nd level. And I was just like, oh, I'm not that good. But it was a way to it sort of also let me know that it's not about the martial arts. Bruce Lee could have started in any other martial art. He was going to end up being Bruce Lee. It was about the idea that, and so for me, there was a part of this that very quickly with my love of Bruce Lee that was about, and then once I stopped doing martial arts, Bruce Lee taught me very little of it had to do about martial arts. Yeah. It's ultimately how to be in the world, how to pursue your goals, how to be inclusive, and how to always defend the underdog, which to me is like basically what the premise of United States of America is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's at some point when I felt like, and I made my friends watch all the Bruce Lee movies. That's just 2 friends. That was the club.
That's a legit club.
My friend Jason got real nice with the nunchucks just because he was hanging at my house a lot. We used to like on bicycles going across town to the martial arts store to buy the new things, and wearing the kung fu jacket, which is that was the part I was like. I had the Kung Fu jacket that you've seen in a lot of the Kung Fu movies, which is not really a Kung Fu jacket, but that's what we colloquially call it. And I was in San Francisco when I moved to San Francisco, far too old to still be wearing this jacket. And I'm walking down the street in the Richmond district, which is like San Francisco's downtown Chinatown is like the tourist Chinatown, but the Richmond district this is just where Chinese people live, Chinese Americans live. And I was walking down the street in this Kung Fu jacket, and I looked around at nobody else wearing a Kung Fu jacket. And I took it off and just quietly put it in the trash and left it there like, I think I have to be done with this. Because it's not about the shoes, the clothes, the martial arts. That's like the tip of the spear, the tip of the iceberg to get into Bruce Lee.
That's right.
The philosophy is still with me. It will always be with me. Like it's how it's embedded in most of the things I do in my day are sort of embedded in this Bruce Lee philosophy. And when I stopped doing martial arts, I felt like if I let Bruce down, but I was like, not if I continue to live an eclectic life where I absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is specifically my own.
Bing, bing, bing.
Yes, yes.
You get extra points for that.
Thanks. I'm still realizing how this thing started with the thing, so I'm trying to save myself.
So interestingly, as you were coming into awakening with the Bruce Lee and Asian culture, Jeff, being an Asian, like all Asians, we just kind of just are born knowing about Bruce Lee because this is like because he's one of our own. But
it's like at night that our parents, sing to us the songs of Bruce Lee.
They
ballad
sing
of Bruce Lee.
the ballad of Bruce Lee. We're babies. We just know it,
Bong, bong. Yes, I know the songs.
Yes, you do.
Yes,
The
you
soundtrack.
Yeah. If you haven't figured it out yet, Kamau is a hardcore Bruce Lee geek. What I wanted to say is, so, he's just, in our consciousness, in our community, and yet you come the other way around into African American culture through, this exploration of your book, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, about hip hop. And there is this kind of energetic connection between energy of hip hop, energy of Bruce Lee. So, I want you to kind of talk to that a little bit.
It's really interesting. Like Kamau's over there in Ohio, in Chicago.
Chicago, not Illinois.
That's right. You were in Ohio at that point. Okay, sorry.
Don't do that to me.
Sorry, brother. Yeah. They're different. I get it. They're different. But you're over there, like, for me, Chicago's like the Far East. You know what I mean? I grew up in Hawaii, so that's like the Far East to me. And you're like coming to Bruce Lee, and I'm coming to hip hop in Honolulu. It's like, it's an interesting, and here we are.
Yeah, here we are. Right? Yeah.
I mean, the thing about hip hop, about Black freedom cultures, is this notion that the folks at the bottom should be speaking, first, and that this is where the visions, the creativity, the imagination for change that frees everybody comes from. I think that's at the basis of the Black freedom movement and Black freedom culture, and that's what I learned through hearing reggae in Hawaii, through hearing hip hop in Hawaii. And that's not to say that hip hop is always, a freedom culture.
We're talking about early days.
But I mean, we don't even have to break it up into like early days or whatever. It's a dialogue. It's a whole bunch of different types of voices that are sounding, right? And I think that that's the connection in some ways to Bruce's philosophy, right? Is that this is about getting yourself straight, getting your community right, and recognizing the humanity in each other. And that's the sort of paradox, right, of martial arts. This whole thing of like pounding on each other. It's meant to, like Bruce talked about it as a dance.
Yeah.
Right? If you're working out with somebody, if you're watching boxing matches, as bloody as they can be, the best ones are a dance, right? They're a communication.
They're a relationship.
They're a relationship. They're an exchange between folks. And so, I think, like you were talking earlier about cultural appropriation, that kind of thing. I just think that at the heart of all of this is a really deep communication that's, heart to heart, that's human to human, and that in the best possible scenarios can allow us to be able to see how everybody, can get free. And so that's what I've gotten out of my engagement with hip hop, my engagement with Black popular culture, and I think like the kinds of stuff that you've gotten out of, martial arts, your engagement with martial arts.
I mean, I just want to piggyback with that. Like, to me, it's this, like, I believe I learned the word eclectic from reading about Bruce, because there was a sense of an eclectic approach to the martial arts, which I've, like, took that word with me my whole life. Like, that's the way to be. Like, looking around, and to me, that hip-hop is about, like, there's a sense of, like, we got 2 turntables and a microphone. Like, how do we make this a party?
Yeah.
How do we make this more than just spinning one record, then spinning another record? How do we get the people to dance? It's about, like, this is what we have. How do we turn it into something else? And that's it with Bruce. It's like, I have all these different martial arts and all these different body types and all these different shapes. How do I bring this together and turn it into something more than the sum of its parts?
Well, and his philosophy is also really, especially Jeet Kune Do, his art that he created is very much, he called it the style of no style, the form of no form, that the tenets of it were simplicity, directness, and freedom. And that he really was into this notion that styles separate people. They limit your thinking a little bit, and that through exchange and through direct engagement, you learn about somebody else, but you also learn about yourself. And that he really saw his engagement in the martial arts as a self-knowledge tool. He said everything he's learned about himself and about life, he learned through his practice of the martial arts. And so, he was very much about knowing oneself and then expressing oneself out in the world,
You know what's interesting also is that in our archives we have all these old treatments that Bruce wrote and all these diary entries, but especially in the treatments, and especially when he kind of pivoted from wanting 100 martial arts schools to like really the way that I'm going to get my message out to the biggest audiences through entertainment. And just noting that almost everything he wrote in parts for people of color. At a time when that was not cool. I mean, it's kind of still not cool, but but I mean, to the higher ups, but like at the time, he always like, there's just notes of like, oh yeah, like African American friend guy, and he does this, and to actually as a screenwriter, as a content creator, as a potential director, producer, to be mindful of that then, just I want you to kind of speak to this whole, philosophy of this family of man that your dad had and how he actually executed on that level with it.
Yeah, he was the eternal student, and he loved the exchange of knowledge, and he loved flavor and diversity and language and, all of these different things. And so he was always trying to find ways to express himself, but also to set up worlds that and scenarios maybe that hadn't been seen, that hadn't been acknowledged. I'm working on a TV show right now that is based on a treatment that he wrote. It's going to come out next spring. And
on what network?
On Cinemax. It's called Warrior. And it takes place at a time when the show takes place in the late 19th century in San Francisco, Chinatown, right before the Chinese Exclusion Act is enacted into law. And that was he wanted that theme as part of the show. And nowadays, I've told so many people like, oh yeah, this show and the Chinese, they're like, what's the Chinese Exclusion Act? They don't even know what that is. It's not taught. As much of American history is not taught. And so he was always trying to sort of highlight and acknowledge and include and express his humanness, which meant expressing everyone's humanness in his creative work, in his teaching, in his philosophy, just the way he was in his life. And so, many of the writings reflect this. The way that he lived his life reflects this.
And
Go ahead.
No, because we talked about this earlier, and I feel like you can't go without saying, again, the thing that connects black people to Bruce Lee is his fight against racism.
Yep.
And there's we're talking about movies, but literally in his life in show business, as we talk about representation now, and Oscar So White by April Rain, and all these, and the biggest movie of the year is Black Panther, and Sorry to Bother You's in theaters, and Blind Spotting, and Oakland's the best.
Yes.
Boom, boom, boom.
This is all Oakland movie. But the idea that that the Warrior was a thing he pitched around to Hollywood, and they were like, we can't make this because we can't let an Asian man be the star of a TV show.
Yep.
So what do? They steal the idea and create the show Kung Fu starring David Carradine. And Bruce's name is nowhere on it as a creator of the show, so don't ever watch that on rerun. But it's just the idea that, as we talk, that he was like, and then he goes to Hong Kong to go, okay, I have to, even though I've read that he didn't believe their quality of movies was as high as he wanted it to be,
That's
but
right.
I have to I have to go do this over there to then cross over to Enter the Dragon, which is an American-made movie co-production, to then where he's working on this, where the final scene, the villain of the film is not like the best Chinese American or Japanese American art. It's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You know what I mean? It's clearly like this is where he was headed. He was trying to bring us all together, and it's and to me, that's such a, the ultimate tragedy is not knowing where it was going to go.
Yeah, and in context, I mean, this idea is edgy now. So think about back then.
There's still executives. Should we have a show like all Asian people in the Is America ready for that?
Right.
Yeah. And not only that, at the time, the roles that Bruce was being offered were really the most awful portrayal of Asian characters, that you could possibly think, like villains, and I just classify them, and I can say this because I'm Asian, is just like a Ching Chong Chinaman kind of character, and it's like he having his own confidence intact in some amazing way.
Well, and this is why he created his own projects.
Right.
Because the projects didn't exist.
Yeah, so and then he had to leave Hollywood to then come back. So for those of you who don't know the history, like the Enter the Dragon only happened because he left to go to Hong Kong where he could be master of his own destiny, and then he became such a huge star. Then Hollywood was like, hey, what about that Bruce Lee guy?
I don't see him as Asian, I see him as green.
Yeah.
And by the way, just to put into context what an uphill battle this was, one of my father's good friends and students was the head of Warner Brothers. And he pitched this idea to Warner Brothers, and the head of Warner Brothers could not sell the studio on letting him star in this show.
Yeah. That's how built in the racism was. And but I want to say, you know, back to Bruce's philosophy and how it's affecting all of us. In that context, he could have become a very bitter man. He could have been very angry. And yet, you know, Shannon and I are at pains to find anything negative through any of his journal writings. I mean, we have like thousands of pages to look through. And he was this incredible, determined optimist, right?
He was. I mean, one of the sayings of his philosophy is keep your mind on the things you want and off the things you don't want. And the Be Water quote is all about, like, you hit an obstacle, you flow around it, you figure out a way. You got to go to Hong Kong to make a movie, to make movies, you go to Hong Kong to make movies. But the important thing to know about my father is he obviously exercised his body, but he exercised his mind. And he was highly self-educated. He read thousands of books, annotated, underlined. I have all of his books. He wrote notes and all these things to himself, but he also, exercised his mind daily like a type of fitness, like he did with his body. And he carried around affirmations and he read them and he practiced the art of positive thinking and it was a part of his daily regimen. And so, it's true. When you look in the writings, there's not one like, I'm so pissed that this is happening.
Yeah, like Warner Brothers didn't like my idea and stole it, boo, none of that,
Exactly.
That is one way in which I'm not like Bruce Lee. I'm mad about stuff from second grade.
Well, and that's not saying he wasn't mad about stuff.
Yeah, no, he expressed anger, but
I
he
mean,
did not spend his constructive time on it.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to Kamau because you said you had visions of yourself being, a martial artist, but then, that pivot point where you absorbed all of the philosophy and then found your own path and kind of how it influenced your career as a comic, as a writer and producer, and not taking that like, here's the sitcom route, this is what you do, and having, that's an intense thing to not go on the well-worn path, right? So like, just talk about how his philosophy influenced you.
Well, I mean, I think that like, as a black person growing up in America, you're just if we just talk about black role models, you're filled with, there's any number of role models where you get to see, you can't expect to go the path that white people go and it's going to go well. You can't just expect that like, well, I'll do this and I'll do this, but you have to be willing to adapt. And so then you learn about Bruce and it's like, oh, this is for flex. This is another example of learning to adapt and learning to flow with what's going on. And so for me, there was a point, so it's the be like water is a big thing from like learning from Bruce. And so there's a sense of like, when I stopped doing martial arts, I got to a point where I just sort of like realized that the thing that I needed from martial arts was that I could defend myself. I didn't need mastery the way that Bruce had it. I didn't have the intestinal fortitude for that. But I got to a point like, oh, I can defend myself. And also, I've learned how to be in the world, so maybe I will not, so I can just avoid the fights before they show up, Because I think the one thing I always highlight with Bruce Lee movies is like, every Bruce Lee movie of the 4 completed ones, he doesn't actually want to fight.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
He doesn't. It's like the first half hour, which when you're watching Bruce Lee movies, like get to the fight. But you know, like I get it, man. But
That's right.
that's why I rented the movie. But it's really like he spends like like 15, 20 minutes, a half hour, like I really, because it's like it's not actually the goal, as you said earlier. So for me, it became clear to me like I have learned through my martial arts training how to not fight for the most part, and if I do get into a fight, I've learned how to handle myself. But the lessons of him as a person, as an artist, I'm still applying. And so, like as a stand-up comic in 2009, when I'm like I've been going up at the Punchline in San Francisco for 12 years now on Sunday nights doing 7 minutes, and showbiz hasn't discovered me yet. Like, there's a sense of like I need to there's a part like should I quit? And then it was like, or should I do something that feels better even if I don't know where it's leading to? And that's what I did. I started my solo show in theaters. Kamau Bell, Ending Racism in about an hour. And I mean, Jeff is basically, I wasn't 12, but it's basically like in showbiz, I was 12 when I met you. Like I was starting to do these things and like sort of like just renting out black box theaters and printing up posters and putting them around the city and learning how to write press releases, like learning how to put myself out there in a different way and sort of really putting the cart before the horse and then learning what to do when the cart's way out there. You know what I mean? So for me, that was the thing about like be like water. Stop heading into the same obstacle over and over again as if that's going to change. Figure out a different way. And really the thing that I, at the time, was like, I'm not even concerned about success. I'm concerned about artistic fulfillment. And then checking that against realities of the world. Like if the thing sells no tickets, maybe I need to rewrite this thing. Or if every review is bad, but like really sort of like, but also like sort of going, this feels good to me. This is the best work I've ever done. I'm getting positive feedback. Keep going in this direction. Because there's no way that when I was watching Bruce Lee movies, and at the time I still liked comedy was another thing I liked. I watched a lot of comedy. Even if I pictured myself as a comedian, there was no like, and then I'll get a show on CNN. That was not a thing that I could have even envisioned. Not even a year before I got the show on CNN could I have envisioned that. But it's just like, just keep going in the productive direction. And the thing with Bruce is like, it's not just dreams, it's goals. And checking yourself against those goals and asking yourself questions if you haven't met those goals. Like really, like in a very, like we can sort of talk about the theory and the dream part of it, but it is actually like set goals and try to meet those.
He has a quote: "Be a practical dreamer backed by action." You know, and he also, by the way, so he had all this, be like water and adapt and and walk on and all these things, and he also had a poster on the wall in his office, which I have on the wall in my office, it's this fabulous like 70s, almost looks like a blacklight poster, and there's 2 vultures sitting on a branch over this barren desert, and there's like a cow skull on the ground, and it says, "Patience my ass, I'm gonna kill something."
Talking about.
So it's like, it's the 2 sides, you know?
Yin yang, yin yang.
Yin yang, yin yang.
We talked about this too, that he also had a family, and like he couldn't just be sitting on thinking about like the thoughts is like, I got to feed these people.
Totally.
I got to be a part of like, I got to be out here making sure that I take care of my family, and I think about that all the time. Like it's like people are like, how many, you have a lot of things. Yeah, I got a lot of people in my house. I just had a new one 5 weeks ago. That the idea that there's a sense of him as a provider. You know what I mean? Like as a person who like takes this, it's not just Bruce Lee out in the world as a superstar. It's Bruce Lee as a dad. As a husband.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to John Boog's piece and just the kind of, if you look at the diaspora of African-American artists who are influenced by Bruce Lee, the scope is so broad. You have movement artists, you have chefs, you have actors, comedians, directors, and like the entire Wu-Tang and all these
athletes.
I mean, the UFC, they call him Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee is the godfather of mixed martial arts.
Right. So Jeff, I wanted to ask you, just culturally, it's like water. His energy has been able to kind of permeate all these tribes that even among the African American community might be very separate and not very connected. And his energy is kind of woven through like water. And if you had any kind of thoughts on that.
just that I think, every generation kind of rediscovers Bruce Lee in a different kind of a way. I just remember there was a really amazing crew of rap folks from out here in LA, King T and the Liquid Crew, and they used to have this song called "Got a Bad Job," which is one of my favorite songs. And like this came out probably the early '90s, and the chorus or the pre-chorus or whatever you want to call it was, some people use the word rapper too loosely, and just how many rappers say they're kicking like Bruce Lee. And it had become a cliche by the early '90s for rappers to be talking about, like, I kick rhymes like Bruce Lee, And what's interesting to me now is you see, Kendrick Lamar, right, doing his Kung Fu Kenny thing. You see Nicki Minaj doing her Chun Li thing or whatever, and it's interesting because now, like, there's a whole debate about cultural appropriation, and I think that debate is really appropriate. But I'm also interested in the ways in which folks are rediscovering, this kind of stuff in each generation, and the way that they express it might be, weird, might be, hey, let's talk about this a little bit, or whatever, but it's still out there. It's still a thing. Even when we talk about representation of Asian Americans, a lot of folks now will say, oh, well, like, there's only parts where I would have to be a kung fu artist, and it's always been like this. And I'm like, not really. It wasn't a thing until Bruce Lee made it a thing,
Right.
And I guess my point there is just that there needs to be ways in which we're forcing these doors open, in which communication can happen and people can actually have some sort of an exchange in an era in which we're more divided and segregated than ever. Especially young folks growing up these days are much more segregated than even we were growing up, right? You in Ohio, or I'm sorry, Chicago. But you know what I'm saying? Like, there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way for folks to be able to have these conversations, to continue to be able to have these conversations.
Question and answer, right?
And we're going to have some time for a Q&A for you guys. So before we get to that, I just want to wrap by kind of, it's a nice way to talk about really, this energy of Bruce Lee and how it's manifesting. I mean, most of the fans on the Bruce Lee Facebook page have never seen the movies. By far they're young, and it's the philosophy that somehow really resonating with them at a time when we are short on role models and real people who are not just celebrities, but also fathers and husbands and family men and real, in the real world. And yet, my experience is that if I walk through places with like a Bruce Lee shirt, hands down, there's going to be somebody who gives me a smile and a thumbs up, like just completely randomly. And the way that like a stranger doesn't ever do, and if a stranger does come up to me and does that in another way, I'd be like, ugh, like weirdo, get away from me, But
stranger danger.
Yeah, stranger danger, because we don't have a custom of doing that, right? But it's kind of an interesting thing that I observe, as an anthropologist, like, oh, this is really interesting. So having this person's face on, a T-shirt is an open invitation for a stranger to say, yes, you and I, we're the same, and we both love him, and that makes us one tribe. And this energy of unity was such a big part of his philosophy, is that like kind of leveling everybody up from this intense tribalism, this moment that we're in. And if you guys want to just share about that as we close out, because it is really one of the great lasting thoughts and energies of his legacy that we still see so much out there in the world, and how that's affected your personal life or your career or whatever, just kind of speak to that stuff.
I mean, for me, the exciting thing about doing this biography is just trying to recover how big his accomplishment was. If you put him back into history, and you look at where he began, and you look at where he moved it to, it's a huge accomplishment. He grew up in post-occupied Hong Kong. The war is happening right across the border. People are pouring in into the city. It's just mad chaos. There's fires that are destroying hundreds of thousands of homes all the time. It's like the Bronx in the 70s, really. Like that's the time when he's growing up. Then he comes to Seattle, and he starts the counterculture. He helps to start the counterculture, along with people like Jimi Hendrix and all the folks in San Francisco. He helps to start the West Coast counterculture. And then he goes back and becomes a star. And 1973 is a pivotal year because you have Bob Marley coming out with Catch a Fire. You have Kool Herc throwing his party in August that Cindy Campbell organized. And then you have Enter the Dragon coming out. And the whole culture, popular culture, shifts from this white-centered culture to a global popular culture that we have today, in which we're more connected than we've ever been. And that's what Bruce did. And so, I think that's kind of the epic story, that he lived, and it's why we can be here today. But it's why millions of people around the world are still talking about him. Is because he made it possible. He made generations upon generations, millions and millions of people able to be able to find themselves and find their voices.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And thank you. Well said. And I think for me, we talked about the statue in Bosnia, but I have had numerous stories from people who were. Somebody told me recently there's this tiny ice fishing cabin somewhere in the middle of like Montana or something, and that they went to it, and in this tiny cabin where you seek shelter in the middle of this freezing landscape, there's a picture of Bruce Lee on the wall. Mm-hmm. And they call it the Bruce Lee cabin. And then I had a friend who was in Tanzania driving on the side of the road, and they stopped to get some water, and there on the wall is a picture of Bruce Lee. And my father, toward the right before the year before he died, he was working on the film Game of Death, and Enter the Dragon. Hollywood had come. They were talking about doing Enter the Dragon. It was a very jam-packed, chaotic time of his life. He was working on one movie, prepping another movie, and at that moment in his life, he sat down and tried to pen this essay, which we have several drafts of, and that he never finished, called In My Own Process. And in these drafts of this essay, he talks about many things. He says, I'm a martial artist by choice and actor by profession, but what I really think that I am is an artist of life. Mm. And what I would like more than anything is for when somebody sees my performance or sees me, that they go, look, there's someone real. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, first of all, that he accomplished that he exuded that energy, and that it was an enthusiastic energy. It was an alive energy. It was an up energy. And that is what we all sort of gravitate to in him, is that there's someone real, and there's someone who shouldn't have been able to do what he did. He just, through the sheer power of his cultivating his own energy and his belief in harmony and his belief in sharing what he had within him was able to, I mean, this July 20th, this Friday, it'll be 45 years since he died. And we're still talking about him. And what I always tell people is, everybody, like 99% of the population, they know the name Bruce Lee. They might not know much about him, but they know the name. And this is what excites me about getting to continue his legacy, is that this is why. You may not know why you know the name, but this is why, because he was someone real. And you could feel it, and you could see it, and he imbued himself, and he reached out to everyone and said, you know, we're one family. And so he looked at differences as uniquenesses and the things to be celebrated.
I gotta follow Shannon.
You're closing us out. We gotta wrap up.
I mean, it's not much more I can say other than yes. But I also think I just want to be. There's one thing you said that you said something. I know what you meant by we're sort of. There's a lack of role models. Is that what you said right now? I feel like it's not that there's a lack of role models. There's just a surplus of not role models. That we're awash in not role models, so that it's harder to get to the role models sometimes. And there's one.
You doing
big
the double negative thing?
Yeah,
Okay. Just
I'm
checking,
being eclectic.
checking.
And I feel like the one thing, if you just reduce Bruce to his kicks and punches, there's a lot of people who can kick and punch. And some of them, frankly, can probably kick and punch better than him, you know, if you're just going to go about who can kick higher or whatever, like, you know. But just whatever, you know, you just want to judge it by. It's like, I feel the same way about Michael Jordan. He was not the most athletic basketball player in the history of all time, but there was something about him that is different, that when he does it, it hits people in their heart in a different way. And I feel the same way about Bruce times 1,000. Like, there's just something about him, so that if you're, like you said, we talked on the phone about, there may be people who like Bruce Lee's kicks and punches who are not actually representing defending the underdog. You know, when really it's like, if you're not talking about defending the underdog, if you're not talking about bringing people together, if you're not talking about using your privilege to help others in the world, then you didn't really learn the lessons of Bruce Lee. I absolutely see him as a political figure who's relevant to today.
And just to close it out, you know, this topic is really about this connection between Bruce and African American culture, but really at the heart of it is his ability to transcend race. And which is why his energy so easily permeated, you know, a black boy in Chicago.
I'm sorry I started this meeting.
Yeah, totally.
I really am. I know I'm not going to hear the end of it for the rest of my life.
Anyway, so sorry we went over a little bit. So we're going to open it up to Q&A. Can we just put that last slide up for the quote, because this is really kind of what we're, you know, closing on. And if we could, I know you guys have a lot of questions maybe about Bruce, but if we can stick to the topic. So let's start Q&A. Mics? Somebody will bring a mic to you. Yeah.
Is there a way for white people to follow and share Bruce's philosophy without committing cultural and racial appropriation from Facebook?
Well, I mean, I think the beautiful thing about my father's philosophy is that it's not like a Chinese philosophy, you know. I mean, it already does that. So just by understanding it, following it, sharing it, then I think that that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Also, Shannon is half white. So she's already mixed. And
yeah. If you were wondering why I don't look that Chinese, that would be why.
No, it's available to everybody. You know, this
is
is a philosophy that he wanted to share with everybody. So there's no boundary up for it.
I mean, the quote,
Look at this. We are all one family.
Under the heavens, there's one family, you know.
I just think you have to understand that cultural appropriation, much like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. So you may think you're not, and somebody else may be like, I have opinions about that, and then it's up to you to decide if you want to take those opinions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the bottom line is respect.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's the bottom line for any exchange, any communication. So,
Yep.
Hi, my name is Sunshine, and the question I have is that did Jim Kelly and your father ever do any movies together? Because, you know, when I was growing up, Jim Kelly was very hot as African-American kung fu, because everybody was kung fu fighting.
Yes. Well, yes, I do. Of course. Jim Kelly was in Enter the Dragon with my father. Yeah, yeah. And so, you know, they were, you know, they were colleagues and friends. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think Erykah Badu tweeted the other day, everybody was not kung fu fighting. Really. So she was correcting everybody on that.
Okay, question over here on this side of the audience.
Hi, this is actually directed to Shannon. My name is Stacy, and I understand that your father was a childhood actor as well, and I was wondering if those films have been preserved and are they accessible at all?
Yes, yes and no to the are they preserved and accessible, but yes to that he was a child actor. My father was in approximately 20 films prior to up to the age of 18. His father was in the Chinese opera and was an actor, and that's why my father was born in San Francisco, because his father and mother were on tour with the Chinese opera in the United States in 1940 when he was born. Those films, some of them have been preserved and are available, and some of them are not. And so his probably most notable performance was in a movie called The Orphan, and that was his last film that he did before leaving Hong Kong, and it was a big hit, a starring role for him. And that film was submitted to the Venice Film Festival back in 1959, I want to say, and then was lost for about 30 years. Until they discovered it still in Venice on a shelf somewhere, and it was returned to the Hong Kong Film Archive. But it's not actually available for viewing. You have to go to the Hong Kong Film Archive to see that film. Yeah.
I think there are 3 movies that are on DVD, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And one is called An Orphan's Tragedy, which so there are some similar titles, but that's not The Orphan. Yeah.
Yeah.
First off, thank you, all of you. It was a fantastic discussion. Shannon, if your father was alive today, would he be marching as a very influential actor? Would he be in politics? And would you think he'd be running in 2020 for president?
You can answer all those, right? You can commit to those answers,
Yeah,
right?
hold on, let me channel. Hold on. No. You know, it's my father, as I said, was an artist of life, and it's hard to say where that path would have ultimately led him. He definitely would have continued to be a creative and make his own projects. And, you know, he directed and produced and starred in Way of the Dragon, his 3rd film. And so he might have gone on to do more of that. At the same time, you know, he was, I can only imagine and only believe that a person who had these thoughts, who lived his life this way, wouldn't want to stand up for what he believed in. And so if he were alive, I would be voting for him in 2020, for sure. He would be a kick-ass president. Ha ha ha. But, you know, it's hard to say because he was evolving all the time. And part of what he said was he really believed it was his lot in life to continue to peel back the layers of his own being and discover just more and more deeply who he was as a human being and just continue to grow and evolve. So we can only imagine where someone with his energy would have taken that. And if I get any messages later, I'll let you know.
Okay, last question.
Okay, last question is over here.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Jeff, Shannon, Kamau,
hi.
and
Sharon.
Sharon. I kept getting the names confused.
I knew. I told
I'm
you
so
this would
nervous.
happen.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much. As someone who is part of a younger generation that didn't really grow up with Bruce Lee's movies, my dad did. And just listening to this conversation, I kind of was trying to think of what I know of Bruce Lee, what my dad knew of Bruce Lee, and his legacy. And, you know, I will be honest with you, I just saw Bruce Lee as a martial artist, actor, you know, that's all I saw him as. And listening today, what he stood for, you know, as someone who is a brown Muslim girl living in this country today, learning that this person who was so powerful, not only on screen and with his fighting, was actually fighting for me and my people and, you know, people, the underdogs. It's really, really important. And I just want to say thank you so much for continuing his legacy. Thank you so much, because you're not only Shannon Lee, Bruce Lee's daughter, you're Shannon Lee, the person who is continuing the legacy of someone so important. And I just want to thank you so much for that and having this discussion, because the younger generation really does need to know what he did and what he has continued to do. So thank you.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
thank you. And I have to say, this is why I do this. I want to share his legacy and the truth and totality of his legacy and who he was as a human being, is so that it can be felt by someone like you. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank
And
you.
I just want to yes, thank you. I just really feel like Shannon, and this is my job, is to does not get enough credit for holding the legacy, because it's not like you had to. You know, there are many companies who'd happily buy that legacy off of you. And,
Yes, I know.
so I really feel like there's a special place and a special attention and we should really hold the fact that Shannon's a very special person to make this her life's work. And I think that that's why it gets to connect to you, because she's really putting the philosophy front and center. Somebody else is just going to make it about kicks and punches. So I just want to make sure you get your credit.
Thank you.
So thank you, everybody, for really joining us in, you know, what is really becoming for us an annual celebration of his ideas and his influence. And we hope that it's uplifting to you and it stays with you and opens your heart a little bit more towards your fellow human being and elevates us all past, you know, divisiveness. So I leave that with you. And I just want to say that both Jeff and Kamau have books that they will be signing, so hang out and bother them. They're happy to talk to you. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sharon. Wow, that was a
Thank you,
beautiful way
Sharon
to end.
Lee.